and welcome to episode 2 of the Social podcast. I'm here today with Ellie and Claire from Join the Dots is Social Intelligence team. And last week what we did is we introduced you to what social intelligence is and how it's different to just kind of social listening. This week we actually want to go into some of the practicalities of social intelligence, how it works, what data points we use, and things that you need to consider when doing a social intelligence project. To start off with, we've got the social intelligence team here. It'd be good to know, you've got a new briefing. What do you think about first?
I think first actually is always starting with the brief, as many market researchers do. Some of the challenges we face with this type of work is we get enormously broad briefs. So we may get someone coming and say, tell us about this brand. What are people saying about this brand? Which at times can be challenging depending on the volume of data that we're working with. So normally our first point of call would be to try and work on refining the brief as much as possible. So what is it that you're looking to understand? Like what are you going to do with this data? And that can really help shape the direction that we go in with the social intelligence. The challenge can be when you have massive data sets is that you can be so broad you don't always learn enough, or you end up going down rabbit holes that actually aren't going to meet the objectives. It tends to be refining the brief, understanding what the business objectives are that this brief is meeting, and then working from there. That's the first point of call.
I think on the flip side of that, some of the projects that do work well for SI is when clients, we want to understand what they want to get out of the data, but not necessarily exactly where they want to take it. And the great thing about social data is that it's all out there already, so you don't need to ask questions and start leading it. First of all, you can almost set the scene and understand the full landscape before kind of delving into more sort of narrow fields of research.
Yeah, and on that, when sometimes a client has, particularly if they've not done much social intelligence work before and they just want to get a feel for what are the conversations happening out there, as Claire said, we can get a top line and actually then work with them to say, look, okay, this is where do you want to drill down further? Where do you want to go? And where are you going to get most benefit from investigating this element of the data further? That's how we start to drill it down, maybe after initial broad, if we don't drill it down at the first instance.
You've both sort of mentioned that you might be working on large data sets or kind of data from various different sources. And what data do you typically use?
So we use various streams of data. We have a social listening platform, which will be our main data source, but it's not the only data source that we use. So social listening platforms work by you create searches and it will find the spontaneous data out there that people have created and pull that in. But in order for that search to be effective in the first place, you need to have the right keywords. You need to think about, we create what's called Boolean queries. To help inform that stage, we use search data. So that will be Google search data. We use Google trend data as well. And that's a great indication of what is the natural language people use. So basically, if we're looking at donuts, we can look at what have been the searches created around donuts, what's the language that people have used around donuts, what are some of the brands that people are searching for donuts. And that gives us a sense of direction to help inform the search terms that we'll then put into the social listening platform.
I think the great thing about search as well is that you can start understanding your audiences straight away as well. So we've just done a project looking at holidays and we were immediately able to identify which audiences were looking at what type of holidays based on the search term. So then you can start understanding those conversations within each of those different segments.
Yeah, and it's a great indication of, search is a great indication of people's needs, information needs, because often they'll be asking a question. Sure. In Google, and you can start to get very early on in your project journey an idea of kind of what are the information needs that these audiences have and what's important to them.
And then I guess you can follow up on the searches which people are actually carrying out and see what information they're seeing, can't you, and whether the brand has a presence there.
Yeah, and then I think the great thing that social listening then adds on top of search is search gives you the most basic questions, and then social listening will then give you the emotions around it, any people's major concerns, also where they are talking, where brands should be present, should they be on, which forums should they be on, and that sort of thing as well.
And are there other data sources that you use as well? So we've got search data, got social listening. I mean, are there any other kind of data points which we might think about pulling into a project?
Yeah, so sometimes we will do some more observational data which we include in our social intelligence projects. So that might be we recruit a panel of people, and with their permissions we'll follow them for a period of time on social media just to understand how they choose to express and communicate themselves. Sometimes we'll also pull in passive data. So this is where someone has had downloads an app on their phone, and then we see their activity. That can be another layer of data that we factor into our social intelligence. But I'd say in the main we use search data, listening data, and then if it's an integrated project where we're working with other teams in the business, we'll start to pull in qualitative data or quantitative data, etc.
Sure.
I think also because we're looking quite often at digital behaviours, we do pull in, it kind of opens up, you can understand data of all types of things on websites. So recently I just compared top books on Amazon in different countries to sort of see what types of books people were reading. And again, I think the great thing about social intelligence is it's just like any data that's available online you can pull in, and it's so broad you can look at it in all different ways.
Yeah, and although we call a lot of this like social listening, social intelligence, actually is not, that's just following on from Claire's point, is not actually restricted to social media. It's review data, it's conversations that people have in a forum, particularly, for example, in the healthcare sector. And there's so much activity in forums, conversations where people are talking about a diagnosis or treatment of a particular disease area. But yeah, although we refer to it as social intelligence, social listening, it's not restricted only to social media platforms. In fact, much of the data we get isn't from them at times. So yeah.
And you've both sort of touched upon integrated projects where you might have a qual stream or a quant stream as well. Like how does that tend to work when you've got both those things going on?
I mean, in terms of how we operate as a business at Join the Dots, it will be different teams working on those different stages of a project. But we always start together at the same point. We'll brainstorm the approach, what's the best way to do this research. And when it comes to setting up searches, we'll work with existing teams. If they have existing knowledge of this client or this product area or brand, we'll work with them to understand what the best search term should be, and they'll use their existing knowledge to help support us with that. And then it's really kind of around insight sharing effectively. Typically a lot of our projects will work in terms of, we tend to do the SI first because it can give you a really good foundation of knowledge, and I think I mentioned this in the podcast previously, but I think it allows us to ask better questions. So we'll tend to do the SI first. We'll analyse that data. We might build some hypotheses, say we're doing stuff around customer journeys, around what we think those journeys are, the language that's being used, and then the teams will then go with that knowledge and then build that second stage. So they'll maybe ask more quite concise questions around the journeys to quantify what we have thought from our SI analysis. So yeah, it's all about collaboration. And basically what happens at the end of a project, we'll all come back together again, reassess everything we found at all the stages, and build basically really robust insights for our clients.
I think the other thing that we can add, which you can do through surveys and communities as well, is more visual representations of data. So, for instance, what customers or consumers are posting online and how they're portraying certain things, and then also looking at what brands are doing, so competitor analysis, that sort of thing. And I think combined then with a survey, it just means you've got a very holistic idea of the market in general.
Sure, so it's adding some of a real world context to, say, survey answers or what you found in the qual.
Mm-hmm.
I think particularly with competitor intelligence, that's often a missing piece, and I think that's a piece where understanding what consumers are saying about competitors can add another dimension to a project that's often missing at times from other approaches.
I guess to wrap up, it'd be good to get your thoughts on what should someone keep in mind when doing a social intelligence project?
I always think, for me, I think this comes back to working as a researcher for a while. It is the objectives. I think it's no different to any other research project, is consider your objectives and what do you want to achieve from this, because that will shape how you process, code, analyse the data, and those searches that you create. I do think you need to keep that in mind at all times.
I think that's true, because I think because there's so much data out there, you can quite easily find yourself in a rabbit hole that could be really interesting, or it could be completely irrelevant, and you end up sort of tunneling into something that's not necessarily what the client wants. So yeah, just kind of be focused, but also I guess be imaginative with how you approach it, so you don't always have to take the same approach each time and go digging for the data, because there's so much out there to find.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. I hope that was useful, and we'll see you next week for podcast number 3.